So we have a picture of our Farazan in this review, but Numenor was not in this latest episode at all. So this speaks to a very significant problem that I have with the show in its entirety. I think overall, the story of Numenor, after 4 episodes, which are over an hour long for each episode, we've only spent 20 minutes on Numenor. We're halfway through the season and we've only spent 20 to 30 minutes on a very significant storyline with Numenor, but we're going to spend a majority of the time with the hobbits and the not Gandalf. So we're having these elements that are being injected forcefully into this Second Age show with the wizards and with the hobbits. We're seeing all these elements, and even like Tom Bombadil, like you can have him, but they were repurposing him essentially from his role in The Lord of the Rings for this show specifically. So there's a lot of elements taken from those works for the Second Age show that they're kind of having to repurpose to fit here. And that's the real shame, because you're also completely neglecting a storyline that was written specifically in this Second Age, which is the fall of Numenor, and we've hardly spent any time there. So we're going to spend half of our time on a storyline that really shouldn't be in here to begin with the hobbits. Such a hobbit-focused storyline, and also too with the wizards. Meanwhile, Numenor is being completely neglected. Like, what? Why are we doing this? I think definitely that would improve the show so much if they took the Hobbit storyline out entirely and just spent that time in Numenor and focusing on that. This is why the show is declining in viewership too. They clearly spent a lot of money on the Numenor sets, yet they hardly use them. Yes, exactly. This speaks to the inexperience of the showrunners in such a significant way. They spent $465 million producing season 1 alone, not even with purchasing the rights, just on that, just on filming 8 episodes of season 1, $500 million almost. And now with season 2, they're filming in entirely different locations. They went to the Canary Islands to film the rune scenes, and they're creating new sets for these new locations that they're at. And clearly they're definitely putting money towards the CG. There's a lot more of those things. And what we've seen already, there's the spiders, the ents, the barrow-wights. There's a lot of visual effects. And they even CG'd the mysterious Easterling warriors. They CG'd their masks. And I don't know how much that cost, but it was because they couldn't figure out the design of it in time. The showrunners didn't know what they wanted to do till it got too late, and they just had to put it in post. So they're inexperienced. That's why it's costing so much, because they don't know how to run a production on this scale. They've never had the experience. The only experience they've ever had is something that they wrote for a Star Trek Beyond script, but it was uncredited, so I don't know how much of that they even used. That's the only experience they've had before working on this show. So now you're working on it as writers and showrunners, and for a production, you clearly don't know how to plan for a production of this scale and this level of a beloved IP like this. Season 1 should not have cost you that much. I don't care. It's not about money. It's about sending a message, LOL. Well, at some point, it may get to be about the money, because I feel like in the media now, especially, each article that I see cover Rings of Power, they mention that at the bottom, like, oh, this is expensive and the views aren't doing that great, so we'll see what happens. This is why, like, when Denis Villeneuve was working on Dune, and he saw immense challenges during the production of both films. So Dune Part 1, it had a very significant challenge when it came to the health situation, when it came to the pandemic and having to navigate that. It did end up costing them. It cost the production, raising its budget. But because they knew how to handle it, because Denis Villeneuve knew how to handle a production of this scale, it wasn't bloated beyond what they could handle. They put Dune Part 1 out in streaming, at least for its domestic release. And overseas, they were having to navigate the different theatrical releases there. So overall, those factors, it did manage to get a surprising amount of box office, not profit, but box office. And in comparison to, I think it got 400 million, which is even more than what Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes got. So that's pretty impressive that even Dune Part 1 was able to get that box office. but their budget, I think, was what, $120 million. And yeah, there was some inflation there, but $120 million, and season 1 of Rings of Power is $465 million. I mean, even for like very costly premium streaming shows, that is insane. That's an insane amount of money. That's why it keeps getting brought up in any article now talking about the viewership. This is definitely a problem, and it's interesting. I find it very fascinating because from what was kind of the deal with Amazon and Rings of Power and the Tolkien estate, they were contracted out for 5 seasons with the option or potential to do a spin-off if it was successful enough. But now, like, even the showrunners themselves have expressed doubt of whether or not they're going to get a season 3 renewal, which surprised me because I just thought it was a sure thing anyways. They were going to burn money, however much money they needed to get the 5 seasons, because it was in ink, it was in contract. So I thought that was binding. But now it seems that maybe there was some language in there that had the option for them to not fulfill 5 seasons, because I think the original contract was $1 billion for 5 seasons of Rings of Power, and they've already blown through a majority of that in their first season alone. So this is an article from Deadline. Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power saw steep audience decline for season 2 premiere, Samba TV says. So this was the initial reveal about like where the views are right now with the Samba TV numbers. Samba TV, they have data that just shows smart TVs. Like people who watch from smart TVs, they track that. So keep that in mind. It's not the full breadth of like the full picture of what the viewership is, but it is kind of like a sort of gauge comparing when it comes to the previous Samba TV numbers. You can at least compare it to that when it comes to Rings of Power season 1. So that's why people were sharing it, because according to data from Samba TV, 902,000 US households tuned in for the premiere episode within 4 days of its debut, which is down quite significantly from the first season. In fact, it's half the audience that the first episode of season 1 drew in less time. Samba says that within 3 days of viewing, 1.8 million US households had watched the first episode. So yeah, while this doesn't give us the whole picture, it does indicate that there is that steep decline in viewership. And it says in less time too. And Amazon dropped 3 episodes as opposed to season 1, they just dropped 2 in its premiere. So they had more episodes and in less time, or they had more time to acquire those numbers. And the article says that too. Samba's data doesn't tell the whole viewing story, though it does give a pretty good picture of the episode's performance, and it indicates a steep drop in interest season over season. So far, Amazon hasn't released any data of its own on season 2's performance, but the streamer also opted not to give away numbers for the first season either, only reporting that it delivered Amazon's biggest premiere viewership ever at the time.